The Crusades. I mean, just the word itself, right? It immediately conjures up these epic images of knights in shining armor, a massive, violent clash of civilizations. But what if the most lasting legacy of this holy war wasn't conflict at all? What if it was connection? Yeah, that's the unexpected story we're going to get into.
So when you picture the Crusades, what comes to mind? I'm guessing it's probably something like this. Knights, huge battles, holy war. For centuries, that's pretty much been the dominant narrative. And look, don't get me wrong, the conflict was absolutely real and incredibly violent.
But, and this is the big but, the battles are really only half the story. The true long-term legacy, it's all about this unexpected connection. It's wild to think about, but this violent collision of worlds also somehow became this powerful superhighway for exchange.
Okay, so let's push past that idea of just holy war for a second. It's super important to get this. The Crusaders weren't just marching into an empty, unknown land. Not at all. They were actually following ancient Roman roads, using trade routes that have been connecting these places for millennia. They were literally walking along the spines of older civilizations.
And all of this contact, it sparked what you could only call a knowledge revolution. Honestly, this is where things get really interesting. Because the Crusades brought Western Europeans into this long, close contact with the Islamic world. And at the time, let's be real, the Islamic world was in so many ways way more sophisticated.
You see, the Islamic world had held on to and even built upon all this amazing Greek philosophy and science that had been pretty much lost in the West after the fall of Rome. So what happened? A massive transfer of knowledge. We're talking math, medicine, astronomy, philosophy, even architecture. Let's kick things off with something super practical.
And a lot of this knowledge was incredibly hands-on. I mean, this is a perfect example. Just look at this. On the left, you've got Roman numerals. We've all tried to use them. They're clunky, they're a pain to work with. But on the right, the Arabic numerals that Europe got from this exchange. Simple, efficient, and this is key. They included the concept of zero. This was a complete game changer for everything. I'm talking trade, engineering, you name it.
And it wasn't just about numbers. Take medicine. A physician named Ibn Sina, they call them Avicenna in Europe, wrote this medical encyclopedia that was so far ahead of its time that it, and I'm quoting here, remained the standard text in European universities for centuries. Just think about that for a second. A textbook from one culture being the absolute gold standard in another for hundreds of years. That's incredible.
The exchange included some amazing technology too, like the astrolabe. You can think of this thing as a kind of medieval supercomputer. It was this really sophisticated device, refined by Arab scientists, that lets you figure out your latitude using the stars, tell time, just brilliant. It was one of the most important pieces of tech to pass from the Islamic world to Europe, and it totally helped pave the way for the age of exploration.
And here's a really cool way to see just how long-lasting this impact was. The next time you're outside on a clear night and you look up at the stars, think about this. Names like Betelgeuse, Altair, Vega, all of them, they're gifts from Arab astronomers. Their knowledge is, quite literally, written in the heavens above us.
Okay, so we've got this huge flow of ideas, but that intellectual exchange also fueled a massive economic one. You could almost call it a spice-fueled renaissance, because this contact wasn't just about transferring ideas, it was about transferring immense wealth, and that wealth was about to completely reshape Europe.
Now, to be clear, the Crusades didn't invent trade with the East. That was already happening. But man, did they kick it into high gear. This table really lays it all out. Europeans were desperate for goods from the East, spices like pepper and cloves, silks, fine cottons, beautiful carpets. And in return, the East mostly wanted precious metals, silver and gold. But they also took raw materials from Europe, like timber and iron.
And you really can't overstate how valuable this stuff was. Spices, especially, they were literally worth their weight in silver. I mean, think about it. They were used to preserve food before refrigeration, to make a pretty bland medieval diet taste better, and even in medicine. Spices were basically the oil of the Middle Ages. And the Italian city-states, places like Venice and Genoa, they got obscenely rich by controlling this entire trade.
Okay, so here's the really crucial connection. This trade didn't just make a bunch of merchants rich. No. The incredible wealth that was generated from selling all this pepper and silk, it directly funded the artists and thinkers and patrons of the Renaissance. The entire cultural rebirth of Europe was, in a very real way, built on the money made from this global trade.
But the lessons they learned weren't just about trade and science. Some of them were literally carved in stone. This is such a great visual of that evolution.
So the Crusaders show up in the Holy Land, building the kind of castles they knew from back home. That's the one on the left, the Motte and Bailey. It's mostly wood, works okay in the damp forests of Europe. But in the dry, hostile lands of the Middle East, it was useless. They needed something much, much better. So they learned. They took ideas from Byzantine and Arab fortress designs and came up with the concentric castle you see on the right. Multiple rings of stone walls, towers, slits for archers, just defense in depth. It was a total revolution in how you build a castle.
And of course, they brought these new ideas home with them. The famous, massive Welsh castles that King Edward I built. Places like Caernarfona and Conway, they're direct descendants of these Crusader designs. The lessons learned in the Holy Land literally reshaped how Europe built its fortifications for the next 200 years.
This long, intense period of conflict also forced a kind of internal change back in Europe. It helped forge a whole new identity for its warriors, something we now call the chivalric code.
So, what was chivalry, really?
Well, it was this idea that a knight shouldn't just be a thug in armor.
He was supposed to be a proper Christian warrior, combining his fighting skills with piety, with honor, and with a duty to protect the weak. It was basically an attempt to put some kind of moral guardrails on the raw brutality of war.
But we got to be realistic about it. As we see here, there were really two faces to chivalry. You had the ideal, all about honor and piety and protecting people. And then you had the reality, which was that medieval warfare was just brutal. The code was always more of an aspiration, something to strive for, than a description of how things actually were. Most knights fell way short of the ideal. But that's the key. The ideal existed. It created a standard, a way to judge behavior, and that was new.
Okay, so let's tie all these threads together. What is this conflict's real, unexpected legacy?
Well, one of the biggest changes was economic. Think about the old Roman trade network. It was held together by one single powerful empire. But this new medieval system that grew out of the Crusades, it was totally different. Some historians call it an anarchic order. And that doesn't mean chaos. It just means there was no single boss. It was held together by all these competing powers, city-states, kingdoms, all chasing profit. You could even argue it's one of the earliest foundations of our modern capitalist world.
And that brings us to the ultimate irony of this whole story. For all the bloodshed, all the violence, the Crusades became the main channel for the West to get back its own lost intellectual heritage. All that amazing stuff from the ancient Greeks, philosophy, science, math, it had been saved and expanded on by Arab scholars. So through war, Europe reconnected with its own forgotten past. It's just wild.
Which leaves us with one last thing to think about. If even a war that spans centuries could completely by accident become this incredible pipeline for exchanging ideas, technology, and culture, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Where else, even today, might we find connection in the middle of conflict?